Zero to geek. Learning better is better. Welcome, geeks, and thanks for joining me again to talk about my book, HTML5 Graphing and Data Visualization Cookbook. We're in chapter 7 now, and what we're doing is going chapter by chapter, getting a sense of what the goal of the chapter is, getting a little bit of tips of maybe how I created the book, or some tips on how should you use it, how should you read it, how should you treat it, and more importantly, if there's any homework or ideas of things that you should do on your own after you complete that course. All right, so before we start, again, this is our Wednesday date. In case you're watching it while we're still progressing with this, every Wednesday on YouTube, we push a new book review or a new book chapter review. So, for example, this book has 10 chapters and an appendix, so it will probably take us 11 weeks to get it all done. And after that, we'll pick another book and focus on it. And obviously, because I wrote this book, I have a more in-depth kind of approach into why I built those chapters. So let's right away start. And by the way, if you haven't subscribed already, I strongly recommend that you do, and we'll talk about that more later on. So let's begin. So let's just go over the things that you're actually going to learn as you are working in this environment. So in chapter 7, really the goal of chapter 7, all the way through chapter 1 through 6, which you could call part 1 of the book, you were on your own. We built everything from scratch. From chapter 7 and onwards, which is 7 through 10, we're exploring our options, working with other people's tools. Although one of the biggest problems in working with other people's tools is that they tend to have or too much functionality or not enough functionality. And that's never good, especially when you're trying to build a website. So when you're building a website, you really don't want to upload 100K of information if you don't need those 100K of information. Bad for RAM, bad for mobile devices, bad for whatever else you could think about. It's not good to have more than what you need. Although it's cheaper, easier, faster, so it's actually important to know about. With that said, there's a few components that are really amazing, and sometimes you just want them, and they look great, they work great, and you don't care about the file size as much. So to do that, what I explored for a couple of weeks, and I searched around for just open source projects and things that relate to data visualization and graphing, and I found a couple of things that I liked. Now, deliberately what I did is, because you could do that as well, you could search for things that you like online. What I did is deliberately I took the components and then I tried to do with them something that they weren't built to do, or there was no documentation for it. That way, whatever we're putting here in chapter 7 is something new and a fresh view on things. Thus, if you really like one of the components, I strongly recommend that you go to the components website, because they come with documentation that will give you a better foundation of their environment. Deliberately, I didn't even read the documentation because my goal was, in the process of teaching you in chapter 7, is also to teach you how to deal with building things out of the box and how to modify something that you're getting. And that's really one of the main goals of this chapter, beyond taking a peek at other people's tools, which there are some really, really great tools out there. So let's just skim through quickly the recipes. We're going to create an animated gauge meter using jqPlot. We're going to create an animated 3D chart using Canvas 3D Graph, which is really just, it's not even a component. It's a guy that I almost begged him to let me use it because he just built it a couple of years ago. He doesn't even love it, but I personally do love it. Which shows how modest he is, but it's just a great component and a cool way to see how you could create 3D in a 2D environment, or a fake 3D in a 2D environment, which we'll explore that in this recipes in this chapter. So charting over time, flotJS, which is, we're just going to see how could we update a chart dynamically over time, such as every second or such. And it's really just kind of a hint at how would you create that yourself also if you were working in any of the components we created throughout the last 6 chapters. So literally, deliberately, the topics that I'm choosing are topics that are relevant for if you're going to go open source or you're going to stay not open source. But I really just wanted to give you the option to see of the different approaches that are out there. And then we're going to build a clock using RaphaelJS, which is a really cool animation, kind of like visual animation data library, which is very popular and very cool. And And after that, we're going to create a sunburst chart, which InfoVis, which is something you could create yourself as well. They have a lot of different other components as well. I personally just love the sunburst chart. It's a beautiful way to show relationships between things. And because we didn't cover it in earlier chapters, I thought, why not do it now? And at the same time, I created a modification in it that didn't exist in the chart before to show you how do you deal with changing a chart? How do you deal with changing a component that's already pre-built? Now, before we take a peek at this, one thing that's important as you explore and look for different charts, some charts have legal copy. Some of those legal copies say you're not allowed to change anything. So you have to make sure that you check the legal copy and make sure that you're allowed to modify the components. And if you don't find those legal copy, to drop an email to the author to make sure that they're aware of it and they're cool with it. Most chances are that they will be, but you want to do your due diligence so you don't get into trouble one day because you use the component in the wrong way. With that said, all the components that we created and edited and added into the book are components that the authors allow you to use. Thus, they have legal, check the legal copy, but those are components that you're allowed to modify, use, and play with. So let's jump in into our browser. And in our browser, again, if you want to find our books, our book itself, or any of our books, just go to zero2geek.com and click on the Books tab. You will find inside our book, which is HTML Graphing and Data Visualization Cookbook. Notice that I'm saying graphing and not graphics is because the name is actually finalized to be graphing, but the site wasn't updated yet. All right, so and in this page, you might not have the source files yet. If you don't, then you probably will find it somewhere here on the top. Or scroll all the way to the bottom, because right now it's just a temporary spot for it until we figure out where to position it. So you could get the book source files completely free. You don't have to be a member on our site. And so are all of the videos in this book. So you could come and watch the videos. I strongly encourage you to come and click on my link to buy from Amazon and get the book. I think it's going to be a great learn if you haven't gotten it already, but let's not talk about that anymore because I'm assuming you have it already if you're watching video of the video of chapter 7. All right, so let's take a quick peek at the components that we're going to be building or modifying. So we'll see we're going to use the JQ meter to create this really cool gauge, and this gauge works in a way where we added some animation into it to make the gauge kind of like dynamic and rendering all the time and kind of like mimicking the feeling of a car driving, or at least that's what I thought. And in the book, we'll go through and see how we could create that. We will create and modify a chart, that 3D chart that we were talking about, which is called Canvas 3D Graph, which I think is a very cool. Got a message. I always forget one thing and then it confuses me. I get confused very easily. All right, so that we're gonna create that. I just think it's pretty awesome. We play around with a few other features there. We jump deep into the code of the original guy that created it and do a few modifications so we could create this animation. We move on after that to create to work with an updating chart using the flotJS library. But really the goal itself is to see how you could update a chart on the fly as it goes, which is going to be something really, really important and useful whenever you're building your own charts. Now the next thing is a clock that we're going to create using the RaphaelJS, and in the clock itself, we're going to have the clock itself morph as the time changes. You just saw it a second ago, but unfortunately it doesn't happen every 2 seconds. It only happens once a minute. But if we refresh, we'll see that we'll see how it all morphs into its actual time. And that's really the goal. So right now it's 3:37 a.m. New York time. Exactly. I'm up really, really early, or didn't go to sleep really late. That's up to you to decide. I'll let you explore that option. All right, so we created a cool little clock here using the RaphaelJS. This is more of a mashup of two examples that Ralph has there to show you how could you basically modify and actually understand how those examples work. Obviously, I have to give credit to Ralph for approving me and letting me use it. Same as for Canvas 3D Graph, which is basically based on it, and I just started making modifications until I was happy by adding animations. And our last one is our sunburst, which basically a sunburst is when we have three things, for example, and we want to show the relationship. So it basically enables us to see the relationship between different things. And really, that's the whole point of it. And I don't know if you could see this. Well, I'm sure you could see this. And it's a really, really cool chart. It's a chart that is really great, mainly when you're doing, for example, trade between countries and stuff of the nature in that nature. So we'll talk more about that. And that's really the essence of our samples in this chapter. It's a very jam-packed chapter, very fun. It's kind of like giving a shout out to the creative people in the industry out there that are sharing and helping and adding value to the web, which is absolutely awesome. All right, so back to talking about what we're talking about. So let me just clear the slate. So what do you want to do next? Now, you have two paths here, and one is I'm personally a fan of building everything on my own. I think it just makes things better, safer. People usually don't hack into things that are completely customized unless you're really big. Contrary to that, if you use stuff that are big, there might be something that's buggy there. That might be something that people could take advantage of. Although it's client side, less probability of that. With that said, it's also about file sizes. With that said, it's also about having a real understanding of the foundation of something. A lot of times, if you work with a specific component, you tend to be a loyalist of that component, making it really hard for you to be more creative. Unless you become a loyalist of a component to the level where you start contributing and modifying the component, and then I'm a fan of that. With that said, it's your choice in this path in chapter 7 to or use this chapter as a jumping point to start finding different components you would like to work with and understanding how to modify them, or you could leverage the knowledge that we're embedding into this chapter and try to integrate it into some of the work that we did previously in earlier chapters. And both paths are completely legitimate. It's really just a different approach in programming. You know what, when you have only 1 hour to build something, and obviously you want to build it with an open source component, when you have 2 weeks to build something and it's very specific and very niche, well, probably a better idea would be to build it on your own. So that covers our chapter 7 topic, and in the next chapters we're going to delve deeper into data visualization. And actually the next 3 chapters are more or less going to be in the Google zone, not because Google is the only thing out there, but because if already started with one library style, there's so many options there that we just didn't want to jump around between libraries just for the sake of jumping around between libraries. So from chapter 8 and on, we're going to be starting to talk deeper into specific platforms. After chapter 7, which is kind of an introduction to all these different types of platforms, leveraging animations, leveraging all these cool stuff that we've just seen. So thanks again, and I hope I see you in our next week date, which is on Wednesday. Don't forget, we have a date on Wednesday.
Please subscribe to us, we love you so much. Please subscribe to us.
You'll find the subscribe button on the top left corner.
Zero to geek.
Learning better is better.